No, these are Ewoks.
Oh my God, they're so cute.
That's right.
So adorable.
Okay, we now have some attendees. Duane, why don't you go ahead and get going?
All right, folks, welcome to the first night of, from a certain point of view, Empire Strikes Back. We've got 6 of the contributing writers from this volume here tonight with us, and the editor-in-chief of the whole massive project, I guess we would say. My name is Duane. I'm a science fiction and fantasy buyer from the University Bookstore in Seattle. I can date myself because I remember in high school going to see this movie when it came out opening day and sitting on the sidewalk outside the United Artists Theater, which is sadly shut. And next day in school, I was a wreck, and my teacher asked me why the heck I couldn't stay awake. And when I explained I've been up all night watching Star Wars, he said, "Okay, this is once. You can go sit in the corner and put your head down." Nice to meet up with a teacher who understood that I was even at that age, I was passionate about science fiction and Star Wars, and it's pretty much ruled my life since then. Well, alphabetically, we've got 6 others here. C.B. Lee, who has written was over, I can't remember how many graphic novels, a lot of work in graphic novels. She's got several short stories. She's been in Wired. She's been on Tor's list of newer authors, and it can go on forever. We've got Delilah Dawson somewhere in the corner down there, who has been quite prolific, raised in Massachusetts, but now she's down in the South. No, sorry, I've got, sorry, my lines are written over here. Sorry. Emily was born in Massachusetts. My apologies. Yes. Emily there was raised in Virginia. That's an interesting change. And I like the part that says Fords in the mountains. I'm not sure how to explain that. Amy Ratcliffe down in the left-hand corner. She has been busy in Star Wars. She's got all sorts of other things like the Jedi Mind, which is, I think, dangerous. And she has a story in this anthology I've not got to yet. Sorry about that. Michael, I'm sorry, Moreci?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
Well, I don't want to screw it up too badly. I have not heard it pronounced yet. Sorry, man.
No, you're all good. You're in the ballpark.
Done his own comics. He's worked with Black Star Renegades and the sequel, and now he's got a story in this new one, etc. Mark Oshiro down there. Mark is, again, you guys are all two-way prolific, so I'm not going to go into this too much. Wasted Space, The Pilot, etc. And I think, have I forgotten to introduce somebody? Let me think here. Most here except for what? There's Tom up in the corner, the editor, who's going to take it away, and I'm going to back off, let you guys all play. So thanks for coming. Having the books in the stock, I think, to cover all you, and have fun.
Thank you, Duane.
Thanks, Duane.
Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the event. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is night 1 of a 3-night Star Wars from a certain point of view virtual event series that we're so excited to bring all of you. You know, this would be absolutely the type of thing that if we were all hanging out together at conventions, we would have done this year. But since we couldn't do that, we decided, well, let's have a virtual event. And hey, instead of having it for 1 night, let's put it together with 3 nights. Let's get a whole bunch of authors from this amazing anthology. Let's have some fun. So we're going to start all that tonight. So no pressure to the lot of you who are group number 1.
Rude.
So no
wow.
pressure at all. No pressure at all. But anyway, just 1 or 2 housekeeping things, and then we're going to dive into some fun conversation. First of all, if you happen to have a question that you want to ask, feel free to drop it into the Q&A module. And as we have time and opportunity, happy to pull some of those questions in. Second, I know that for many of you, you may not have either read the entire book yet or even received your copy yet today. So if you haven't, don't worry. We're not going to spoil everything about the book, but we definitely are going to talk about the stories a little bit. We're going to dive into a few things, but we promise to save a lot of joy and fun surprises for you to find within the pages of the book. So with that being said, we're going to get started where I'm going to ask each of you to kind of start. I'm going to ask each of you kind of a question, a little bit about your own story, and then we'll kind of pull back a little bit and start to talk about The Empire Strikes Back and Star Wars and Hoth and being cold and Leia and all sorts of other things, like, you know, together. And I would like to start with Mark Oshiro. Mark, who, by the way, I'm not sure if people are, Mark is on his on their 5th author event today, so just doing absolutely Jedi Master level work today, and we appreciate that. But Mark, you wrote a story that's called Hunger. And you were so excited. I was looking at the first email you sent me just before this event. you were so excited to tell us the story of the Wampa, to take this monstrous Star Wars creature and turn them into the protagonist of their own story. And you even wrote in that first email, you wrote, "This story will be weird." So tell us about why you wanted to write about the Wampa and why you wanted it to be weird.
I wanted it to be weird because one of the things I loved about the first anthology was all of the characters I didn't expect to get a story. In particular, I believe we even talked about it, like in one of the early emails, was Nnedi Okorafor's story about the monster in the trash compactor. And thinking of that, I mean, if I remember correctly, I only pitched you 2 characters, and one was Winrow Hood and then the Wampa, and then I was like, that's it. It's got to be one of those 2. And so I knew I wanted to get someone who had very little screen time comparative to everyone else, and also was not centered at all. And then we quickly realized this is going to be really hard because I picked a character that can't speak, that doesn't have any sense of language, that cannot use, I mean, this was actually a thing we went back and forth in edits. I couldn't use actual terms for anything because a Wampa wouldn't know what a tauntaun was. Like, it wouldn't call it a tauntaun because how would it have that vocabulary word, because it has never heard anyone speak. So very quickly I was like, what have I got myself into? But I think that's the beauty of Star Wars. I think being a kid, you know, I watched the original, I was born, oh my God, a few months after Return of the Jedi came out. So literally as a kid, some of the first movies that I saw was that original trilogy. And I loved the weirdness of it. I loved how strange the creatures were. I loved that you got these glimpses of a world and then you would just go to something else and you'd see something entirely weird and strange. And so I wanted to capture that while also digging deep into one of the few like extreme side characters that actually weirdly has a lot of canon, because the Wampas have showed up in many books, video games, in some of the animated series stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to get it as weird as humanly possible.
That's great. I mean, I say this all the time, is that Star Wars is sort of at its best when it gets weird. It's one of the things I love about this anthology, is that every story in ways very, very small and very, very large is not afraid to get a little weird. And the Wampa certainly helps set the tone, being the second story in the anthology. Another story that's actually pretty early on, and actually everyone's stories that we're talking to today are from the first third of the anthology, as we talk mostly about stories taking place in and around the wonderful base on Hoth. Emily Skrutskie, you were pretty clear in that you wanted to tell a Torin Farr story because Torin as a character meant a lot to you, and I would love for you to share what Torin meant to you and why you wanted to develop a character a story around this character who plays such a pivotal role in the Rebels' escape in Hoth.
Yeah, well, so what drew me to her first is that she is the only other woman in the movie with a spoken line. It's just Leia and her. And as I was kind of brainstorming for things I could explore in this story, I wanted to give that line some significance that was beyond, you know, its strategic significance in the attack on the base. And I started going into, you know, how could she be feeling in this moment? What would be most interesting for her to be feeling in this moment? And landed on the idea that she was going through this crisis of faith, that she had been fighting for these long, long years. And once again, they were going to have to throw everything down and leave. And so that kind of it got very personal for me too, because I was going through a very difficult patch at my day job where I felt like I was kind of chained to my desk, and I'm doing like tech support for visual effects artists. So like it's long hours, it's, you know, always a crisis. And that made it very relatable for me to be writing the story of this woman who's she's kind of deciding if she's going to keep her post until she dies or not. And that was like the major question I ended up trying to confront in this story.
It's really impressive to see, you know, the character appears on screen for, you know, not even, I think, two minutes cumulatively, and it just seems so resolute and stalwart. And for you create this story of just like the rolling sea that is just underneath the surface. You also have, and we are absolutely going to talk about this as a larger group, so we're going to get to this in a minute. You absolutely have some amazing Han and Leia interaction, and you're not the only one whose story has that, and so we're going to get to that soon. Which is actually a good segue to C.B. Lee, who writes about maybe the most pivotal Han Leia scene, but you're not writing about everyone's favorite scoundrel or their favorite princess. You wrote A Good Kiss, and you introduce us to Chase Wilshore. And I have to say, I defy anyone to read more than one page of that story and not want to just throw your arms around Chase and protect him forever from everything. Like stand in front of the AT-ATs and say, you will not take Chase Wilshore. And he is the guy who is holding the box, who walks between Han and Leia. So how did you look at the guy who's holding the box and say, there is my tragic romantic hero. He's right there, he's holding that box. Move over Han Solo, step aside Princess Leia. Chase Wilshore, our hero, has arrived.
Oh gosh, I think it really, it's so funny because the first email I sent Tao, my agent, when we were first talking about this was literally that GIF and was like, this one. I just felt like that moment was so funny to me, like forever. The first time I watched the movie to like every rewatch, I'm like, that guy, like, what is he thinking? Like, he just like no nonsense. He's just like, I got stuff to do, guys. Like, can you do this somewhere else? Like, and he all this like his whole like just the way he's just like walking between him, like, you know what? Where's my good kiss? You know? And so that really centered, like, you know, when I started thinking about like the kind of character I wanted to write about, and like, you know, I created kind of this like fun, like, you know, he's just trying his best, and he's like, I think that speaks a lot to me as like a relatable person who's like really awkward and weird and like doesn't quite know how to people sometimes. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to Chase because you've been the person with the box, you know, you're not, you know, not everybody is like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, like, and there's a bit when Chase is like he's bothered by Han Solo's just like, you know what, not everyone can just like waltz in here and start flirting with the princess, and like, you know, some of us have like just normal jobs to do, and he's like, his whole thing is about like he wants to be a hero, but he's, you know, failed basic training multiple times and destroys everything that he touches, except that he is good at stuff, he just doesn't see value in it. And so getting to like write his story and really show that, like, you know, really just validate all the Chase Wilshores out there, that like, you know, we're all that guy with the box.
We really are. We need t-shirts that say we're all Chase Wilshore.
Please.
So good. And yes, you did in fact, to confirm, the first email you sent back to us when you said, okay, you know, let's talk about a story idea, was just the picture of the box guy walking me to Han and Leia. There was a paragraph of text underneath it, and I can tell you that the team, the Star Wars Books team, we did not read the paragraph initially. We just looked at the picture and we go, yep, yeah, we need that story. I don't know what it is. I don't really know how she's going to pull this off, but we need that story. So thank you so much. Speaking of another story that we needed, and then I read it and I thought, oh no, sometimes you get what you ask for. Delilah Dawson, you wrote a story called She Will Keep Them Warm. And I just want to let that title kind of sit for a moment. She Will Keep Them Warm. That is about one of the Tauntauns. And I know from having worked with you a bunch, getting to know you, I know that you love creatures and you love Star Wars creatures. So I know that that's like a huge thing. So tell us about settling on the Tauntaun of the many creatures, obviously the Wampa, as Mark talked about. There's all sorts of creatures in Empire Strikes Back. Talk about why you wanted to do the Tauntaun. And then also, when and how did you know that you were going to just destroy and break all of our hearts with?
I mean, I was born knowing that. That's my purpose. That's my special purpose. Yeah, so writing Star Wars, one of my favorite things is getting to do panels at big cons where we had like 20 Star Wars authors on the stage. Mike Siglane's up there, you know, like Pat Sajak with the microphone. And they have to come up with these questions that like everybody can answer so that it's not just Tim Zahn talking about, you know, just all the whole time. So yeah, so he has this question he asked, which is, you know, if you could be anybody in the Star Wars world, who would you be? And by the time they've gone through 25 people and they get to you, like, there's not a lot of stuff left. And so I just started saying like, oh, I'd be like the Tauntaun midwife. Like, I want to be the person that's in there, like up to their elbows in a Tauntaun, like turning the taunlet and pulling it out. You know, or the Ronto midwife that's up on like the ladder helping birth Rontos. Like, we never talk about these people, but they have to exist somewhere. So it was kind of like my joke answer because everything else was taken, and then I kind of got attached to it. So when this came out, my first answer was with, what story do you want to write, was obviously the Tauntaun midwife. And they're like, well, Hank Green kind of beat you to that. So the answer was like, fine, all right, the Tauntaun then. So yeah, it came from that. But of course, the only two Tauntauns that we get to know at all are not Tauntauns that meet happy ends. So it became a dare to make people cry.
Well, mission accomplished. Everyone in the office, everyone who read the story before it was published, and if both the chat and Twitter this morning were any indication, pretty much everyone picks up the book.
And I've already pre-claimed Princess Nisa over here for Return of the Jedi if I get in there, because Hank Green can't have her. No Green brothers.
We'll have to talk to Hank. We'll see what he thinks.
It's fine. It's my cousin.
Well, I'm glad that you did break our hearts with the Tauntaun story, because it's an extraordinary story. And there are several stories, because these are all Hoth stories. Most of these stories kind of overlap each other in small or big ways. And one of the ones that does is Amy Ratcliffe, your story, which does involve at least seeing some of the moments of Delilah's Tauntaun heading off into the frozen waste. And what I wanted to ask you is, this is your first foray into Star Wars prose, but not your first foray into Star Wars overall. In fact, you have another book out today, The Jedi Mind, and you are quickly publishing every kind of Star Wars book ever, which is amazing because you're great at it. But I was interested in hearing from you, was there anything surprising or especially challenging about making that transition from the nonfiction side of Star Wars to the fiction side as you developed this character Corey, who we find out is a journalist who has come to Hoth thinking, oh, this will be great. I get to hang out with all the heroes of the rebellion. And then she realizes, wait a minute, I'm on Hoth and I can't.
What a bad call. Speaking of Hoth, it's the first week in LA that it's solidly in the 40s and 50s. And which I know is not that cold, but I've been in a hat with a Yoda blanket around me all day. So it feels like Hoth in LA. I'm sure it's exactly the same. Anyway, Corey, it was, something that was kind of hard for me to think about and challenging for me to realize was when I write about Star Wars nonfiction, when I wrote Women of the Galaxy, or I write for Star Wars Insider, I'm writing about characters and settings, things that already exist. So there was a moment, figuring all this out, Corey runs into different rebels or it just crosses paths, and, you're trying to go in between the events of the film what we see, but it's I don't have a name for this character. I can suggest it, and you might be okay with it. And I know that's seems such a simple thing, but it's coming from that side of the writing world. It just feels you're are you sure I'm allowed to do that? It's this red button. I'm can I really push it? It's okay. So that was really a blast, intimidating, but it was just kind of cool to get in and tell my own story in the world instead of writing about one that already exists. I love doing that too, and I love analyzing things and breaking stories down. But yeah, it was a really just exciting, intimidating, really intimidating thing.
And this is something you didn't tell me this until after the story was done. But you were like, oh yeah, this is the first time I've written prose in a really long time. And I was like, how long is a really long time? And it turns out it was a really, really, really long time, right?
Since college, which was not super recently. But then, I wrote a children's picture book this year, but I hadn't really sat down to try to write a short story in a while. So much of my writing's been in the reporting world. So yeah, there was a moment afterwards when I think we were in the first round of edits. I'm should I have mentioned this to you? I just kind of felt it was probably blatantly obvious that I was just trying to figure it out as I went.
Listen, to borrow a title from another story in this book, Kevin Scott's "Fake It Till You Make It." Just fake it till you. And you weren't faking it because it's really well done. But yeah, no, it's totally fine. And I didn't have any anxiety about oh my gosh, that was her first story until afterwards. But it was only anxiety and oh, well, she did such a good job. I would have felt more pressure if I didn't know that before.
Thank you for helping me so much.
It's great. Speaking of great, Michael, you have written a ton of Star Wars stories, particularly in comics. This is the first time that you've gotten to come play with us on the book side. And I absolutely love that you not only want to just tell a story about like a rebel, you know, on Hoth, but specifically like a really hard scrabble, like tactile look at a group of rebels who are specifically sent out during the fight, not to do anything other than like buy time. They are not there to win. They are not there to like beat anyone. They are not there to do anything other than fire blasters at AT-ATs that do nothing. Like they might as well just yell insults at the AT-ATs that will do as much damage as those blasters. So talk me through why you chose like that specific moment where it's not even really a fight because they really are just there to eventually retreat, and what it means to be like a frontline grunt in the rebellion at this moment on Hoth in the snow, with duct tape around your, or space duct tape around your blaster. So
And we discovered they don't have duct tape, right? I think that was one of the things that we learned. They don't have duct tape in Star Wars. Yeah, I mean, it's something I was really attracted to because as I was thinking, you know, considering stuff to do, I mean, one of my first impulses when approaching Star Wars, I like to kind of create like new pockets of perspectives, you know, like, you know, in the comic work, you know, when I did a clone series, I created some new clones and they were like clones who had deserted, and we had seen a clone who deserted, but like really getting that perspective and just trying to figure out, looking at this grand mythology through fresh, different eyes, and seeing that like, so it was something that Alexander Freed had done. I think I was kind of building off of his because he, you know, in his Battlefront novel, his brilliant Battlefront novel, he really tapped into that as well. And I was like, well, how can we extend that and like really look at how futile this whole effort is? You know, like the Empire has you outnumbered tremendously, out, you know, firepower, everything, resources. There's anything imaginable. They have far more than the rebellion can ever dream of. So what is that perspective like in one of the worst situations, like you described? You're sitting in a frozen trench, you're freezing, it's awful. You know, who knows? People, they might have been from desert planets. How terrible would that be? You're from Tatooine and now you're on Hoth. Like, so, you know, you have weapons that sort of work, sort of don't. And like you said, you're facing an enemy that you have no choice of even leaving a scratch. So, that really puts your mettle to the test, you know, like what is this rebellion made of when you're just there to not necessarily be a sacrifice, but you're just there to not even win, but just to hopefully mitigate loss and get people off and to the next checkpoint where maybe eventually you can find a way to win this thing, you know, as 99% of these people don't even know who Luke Skywalker is or any of this stuff is happening. So it was cool to be able to tap into that perspective and see the world through Iman Kref's eyes and be like, what would that be like when, you know, you're sitting there and you have all these legends of like hope, you know, rebellions are built on hope, but you know, as the saying goes, you know, everyone's got a plan till you're punched in the face, and everyone's got hope until you're in a frozen trench on Hoth and AT-ATs are coming your way. So I don't know. It was fun. It was fun to kind of look at that through Iman's eyes and through some of his fellow soldiers' eyes too.
It's a really powerful story, and it gets to something that is actually a good segue that I want to now open this up and we'll start talking kind of as a group. But one of the things I was really impressed about with kind of all of the stories, and it even applies to Mark and Delilah, your stories of creatures who they're not rebels. They're obviously not like fighting the Empire, but they are fighting for something, which is all of your stories get at this question of why do you fight? Why do you fight the Empire? And, you know, on the face of it, you know, it seems like a really simple answer. Like, well, we're rebels, duh, and like that's the Empire and we're rebels, and like that's just kind of how it is. But I would love to hear sort of what you all drew on to kind of add, there's like an individuality to each of the characters and why they fight, and things that, Michael, you explored with Amon about what drives him to be part of the villain are completely different, Emily, than what you kind of uncover that Torrin is struggling with. And so I'm interested to hear, like, what did you all draw on, and what do you think the answer is to the sort of why we fight for your character at this time, when, you know, they all wear the Starbird on their arms, the rebels on Hoth, but there's obviously much more that drives each one of them to kind of stay in the fight. And I mean, you know, anybody who wants to start can start.
Well, I think like I could just throw it in, like, sure. I think when I was younger, I had the idea that like just everybody was in this war. Like when you watch Star Wars, it's just like everyone's fighting. And then when you get up and you grow up and you realize people are making a choice to be in this battle. You know, they can stay home. You know, home is, conditions vary depending on the Empire's presence, right? But like, they are making a choice to do this and to join this fight that is very, again, on paper, an unwinnable fight, and they're still doing it. So to, as you know, to mature into that perspective and to see like this is something that they're choosing to do rather than just somebody, this the whole galaxy is doing, is a big it's a big realization. And then drilling down deeper into that, I think really you get some really interesting perspectives, and you see what this galaxy is like, and see, you get to uncover some really interesting perspectives of like why people would do this, depending on that really, you know, profound and dangerous choice that they've made.
You know, I really dug into it. It's certainly, and I'm not the only one by far, but hope is one of the central themes of Star Wars. That's the core thing that I go back to about loving Star Wars the most for. But I was really inspired by, you know, I play in a Star Wars RPG. I play with a Fantasy Flight game. I haven't played in a while, but I play a diplomat agitator during the Rebel period, and it is kind of a constant, you know, in our game, of course, it's all make believe, but we're going to planets, and I'm trying to get people to join the rebellion, to fight with us. And I know, like, I can roll dice and I do that, but I like to role play and give these what I think are very great speeches about hope, and but also while like this is no picnic. Like, and I, with Corey being a propagandist trying to make hollows to recruit people, like obviously when you're making those kind of hollows, you want to show like, the honor, the glory, taking down the Empire. But in reality, you're on Hoth, freezing in a trench, or on Hoth, cuddling up inside a tauntaun or whatever it is. And I think it's like important it was important for me to show like this is a commitment, and that you do have that kind of that really hard, difficult side of being a soldier, in the middle of, you know, what we know about the stars and the wars.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil the ending of my story, because I feel like that is kind of the question that Torrin's grappling with in the course of the story, and ultimately she does reach a conclusion about how to keep fighting and why to keep fighting. But as it goes on, and something I kind of uncovered that isn't as explicit in the text of the story, is the way that all of the women of the base are working together to kind of inspire each other to live. We have, you know, the large public figures like Mon Mothma and Leia play significant roles, but then there's also, you know, Torrin has a sister who's a pilot who's out there fighting on the front lines, and she has her junior officers beneath her who she's working together with. And so that building that network and kind of seeing that come to life kind of unveiled for me another reason why the fight continues.
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties for me was that I had to be very conscious that I didn't want to make the Wampa story too human, like, because I think there's an element, like, I mean, it's also Wampa. There's no like internal Wampa canon. That was the hardest part. Is there's none of that, so I was gonna have to make it up. But I was lucky in that there is some existing canon and like meta commentary. The real idea from it came actually from Mark Hamill. A few years back, he tweeted that he was told that when he swiped his lightsaber at the Wampa that it was just going to singe its fur, and it wasn't until the movie was done that he found out that he chopped its arm off. And he always was like, I don't like that. Like, I don't like that Luke chose to do that. I don't feel like that's actually in character. I feel like it's actually kind of cruel, which then gave me the idea of like, okay, what does this look like for the Wampa? What does that moment mean? And so then I worked backwards, and as I was doing more research, like part of what I came across, I mean, I knew this because I've watched like the extended editions for years, is if you've not seen the extended version of Empire Strikes Back, there are a ton of scenes with Wampas that never made it into the movie. In particular, the base used to be a Wampa home. And it just, from that idea, plus Mark Hamill's tweet, it was just connecting the two dots. So I'm like, what if, even though they didn't really know it, what if the rebels took over someone else's home? And immediately I have a whole motivation for why this one Wampa tracks down Luke, because it assumes it is one of these people who has taken his home. And so that's where I find my way to, you know, like you, Amy, get back to the core theme of Star Wars is hope. So what's the hope for this character? I'm not going to tell you because you got to read the story, but that is what I was dealing with is this notion that like, it's complicated. Sometimes you can be the hero, you can be part of this wonderful rebellion that's extremely moral, and then you don't actually know that you're harming someone else and that you've affected someone else's life. And I loved playing in that really weird gray area, because I also think Star Wars is great when you're in the gray area as well. You know, and then like Delilah, I just want you to get real sad over a creature.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because actually, Delilah, I'm really curious to hear what you think about this, which is both Mark and Delilah's stories. The two of you sort of, your characters kind of interact with the heroism of the rebels and the rebellion, in that, you know, it isn't that, you know, Luke and the rebels are necessarily in conflict with the Wampa, but their actions bring them into conflict, or at least bring them, you know, into a collision with the Wampa. And similarly, it's not that the rebels don't really care about the Tauntauns. Those, you know, it's that the Tauntauns are broadly more seen as kind of like tools that the rebellion is using. They can't use the speeders right now because the speeders are all frozen, so we're going to use these Tauntauns. So it was interesting, how did you balance kind of getting into that without really, you know, without sliding into the like, well, actually the rebels are bad, kind of, you know, one could slide that way with a story like this, but neither Mark or you did. I was wondering if you found that a particular challenge to thread, or how you approach that.
Well, I'm a horse girl. I mean, I don't have a horse right now. I've traded my horse for a mountain bike because they're a lot easier to house. But when you work with horses a lot, you know, you start to realize that they have their own ideas, and that you're going to get a lot farther working with them than against them, because at the end of the day, they're very large animals that can kill you pretty easily if they want to. But a lot of the things that we do to horses, especially if you're not working with, you know, natural horsemanship and really studying the horse's head and heart, are not super kind. Some of the tools we use on them are not comfortable for them, because horses move away from discomfort. So the tools are designed to make them move away from discomfort and towards what we want. So I took the idea that maybe a Tauntaun would be like 75% horse, 25% elephant, and that they are matrilineal, that they have familial relations, they can smell their own blood, they fight for the right to rule smartly, and that, you know, they wouldn't have respect for an animal that couldn't lead. So I read Raptor Red. I reread it again before I wrote this to try to get into that headspace with the idea. I think someone said in my edits, like, Han's kind of acting like an a-hole. And I was like, I love Han, but I think that the Tauntaun would kind of think he was an a-hole. He's like yanking on there and kicking, like, that's not pleasant. But at the same time, when you're fighting more for the supremacy over the galaxy, you don't think like, what can I do to make this Tauntaun's day super nice today? You think, I'm gonna go save my friend so he doesn't die and we don't lose this entire war. So it was, you know, the line to walk. But I've watched people with horses and been like, oh, don't do that, that's not nice. I know you think the horse is doing what you want, but one day that horse is gonna kick your butt. So yeah, it's all just, they're tools in service of the greater good, but it was really fun to get into the head of one. And, you know, it still acts on hope. Like, the story is about hope and what this one particular animal hopes for, and how she finds some kinship with Leia about it.
It is still about hope, which when people see where that story ends up, I think they'll really appreciate, like, one of the challenges in storytelling that doesn't just apply to this story, but all of them, is like, you have to know the moment to get off. You have to know the moment to end. You have to know, where do you stop? What's the line of dialogue? What's the moment? And with all of you, we worked a lot on that. And that story is really indicative. Like, if you find the right moment, that even a story which does not appear to be hopeful, it's a story about one of the two Tauntauns, and they don't make it, it can still be hopeful, is really, really impressive. CB, I would like to start with you on this next question, but obviously I want to hear everyone's thoughts. How much time on Hoth, or really kind of like any rebel base or rebel structure or ship or anything related to the Rebellion, how much time was spent in making wagers, gossiping, and generally wasting time on the will they or won't they of Han and Leia?
Probably too much. I mean, you think about, like, they're probably not getting like direct holo like info, like whatever you brought with you was your entertainment. Like, no one is getting their live stream of whatever the newest you know, space reality TV or, you know, drama. Like, no one was getting their fix. So Emily and I were just talking about this morning, but, like, you know, aside from what books you put on your data pad, like, your entertainment there. And I've had experience like being stuck in places where, you know, you play games, you play cards, you spend time, and it's about like what the relationships that you form with the people around you, and you know, you make the best of it. And I think what was really fun about like also just reading the stories too, because I don't think because I didn't talk with Emily about like, we did not coordinate at all about like what we were going to put in the story. So it was really fun to see the layers coming together, and just like seeing all the different like what I loved about the anthology is getting to see where the rebellion is with like at every step of the way. Like the war isn't just fought in like the big battles and like epic lightsaber duels, but like, you know, it's one person refusing to turn in this piece of paperwork, it's one person carrying a box, or it's one person like doing this small task that could, you know, change the tide of the rebellion. And like I think about like these ordinary people have lives, they have hopes and dreams, and like their own little dramas about like who they're crushing on and what they're hoping for. And I think that's part of the like fun, mundane parts of like getting to explore like what's like a day-to-day life. Like I had a thought about like, what are you wearing? Like if you're from like a very temperate planet, do you just like, you just suffer through the entire time, or do you like put up with it? Or if you're from like a cold planet, like does it not matter? You're walking around like not even wearing your jacket, making everyone die of thirst. Like what is happening here? Just just that like, I think that's my favorite thing about like just like not just this anthology, but getting to that, like what Michael said about like bringing a depth of that like every day, and getting to see what like someone is thinking at that time and how they're going about their day.
Yeah, I absolutely love the synergy that we got between all these stories. Everybody's observation of the Han and Leia relationship, it's all, you know, coming from different perspectives, but it has kind of this underlying current of like, oh my God, you guys, like the people just being completely fed up with it. And so my story opens with the control room having a betting pool going about will they or won't they? And like Carrie said, like it's the only form of entertainment that they really have. Like there's a younger junior officer in the room's Corporal Sunsbringer. So she's Tatooinean, and she straight up, when they storm out of the room yelling at each other, she says, "This is my Boon to Eve classic. Like this is my Super Bowl, is will they or won't they get together?"
That was a great moment, and you're right. It's not just in your story and CB. Amy, you have interactions with both those characters, and have that sort of sense that from Corey that there is something maybe going on there, or something going on there, or at least that there could be something going on there. It was one of the more unintended but amazing synergies that occurred in this anthology. I mean, when people get to Kat Valenti's story about the space slug Exegorth, you will see that even the space slug was rooting for Han and Leia, along with everyone else in the galaxy. It was tremendous. I actually want to switch gears ever so slightly and ask a question that comes via our Q&A from Sarah. And this is addressed to Emily, but obviously I think everyone, I really am interested to hear from everyone about this, which is, she says, "Emily, I read Bonds of Brass the day it was released. I can't wait for the sequel, neither can I, it's amazing. I was wondering how it felt from going to telling your stories about your own characters to going to tell one about characters that already existed, but you could help enhance." So maybe Emily, because the question's addressed to you, start there, but I obviously actually want to hear this from everyone, because so many of you are coming from so many different disciplines or so many different areas of writing, and now jumping into Star Wars, if not for the first time, then certainly in a different way than maybe you have before.
Well, I mean, I'm of an age where I grew up with fanfic, so that's a familiar space for me to be working with someone else's characters, or just doing a thought exercise about what these people were doing in the background of this scene, where we see this one character who looks very interesting, but we're never going to find out what's actually going on inside their head. So it wasn't too much of a struggle for me to go from original fiction to making stuff up about Star Wars, which also, like, my childhood was also doing like deep research dives on whatever Star Wars website was available at the time to find out all of the information, because if I knew all the information, I would be a superior human being, because this is how my child brain worked. So it really was just an opportunity to synthesize all of that stuff that came from like just growing up in fandom.
Anybody else? Anyone else have a particularly like, interesting sort of way that they come into it?
I've done it, you know, I've been lucky to do it quite a few times in Star Wars, and I've written Batman and Archie stuff, you know, so I've kind of played in different sandboxes like that. And I feel like the trick is always like, you got to do two things. Is like, you have to first and foremost, like nail the tradition and what you're doing. You have to like thoroughly know and understand and like really deliver what the thing is. Like fundamentally understand, like, okay, like this is what Batman is. This is what Batman functions. This is what a Batman story is, you know, like, because no one wants to see like something like crazy, like interpretation, you know, whatever. But like the second thing is that like, okay, take that core thing and then tell it, you know, through your perspective, you know, like it has to have your voice, you know, so it's a combination of like, you know, the tradition of what it is and the voice of what you bring to it through your unique perspective. And I think, you know, reading the stories in here, just talking about it, you see that, you see like these unique things, like Delilah has like her creature stuff going on, which is very cool. And she puts like really interesting Star Wars stuff through that perspective. And that's like, that's where the kind of the alchemy happens. That's how these stories, the elasticity of these stories work. It's not because you're just finding some kernel of like a character. It is that, but it's also like, okay, but now how do I tell a unique story about that? And I tell that through my voice in the way that I can tell it that nobody else can.
Yeah, that I think like Emily, like I've experienced with fan fiction, so that the idea wasn't that hard. Mine was just, you know, I've been a Star Wars fan since I was a kid. Since this was my first time writing in someone else's sandbox, I just felt so much pressure to get it right. Like so much, I was just like, I can't blow this. Like this, I may never get the chance to do this again. I got to do it right. So I think that fueled how much research I did and how many times I watched Empire Strikes Back. Even though I watched it as a kid like 100, 200 times, I still was like, every detail has to be right. Every event has to happen in the right exact order. But then I was still like, well, I'm being asked to do this, so what's the touch that I'm going to put on that? You know, and I just like writing extremely highly emotional characters. So I found a way to make a Wampa emotional in its own way. Because like, here's the difficulty of that too, is that the Wampa is also an apex predator on Hoth. There's no creature on Hoth that eats the Wampas. Like as much research as I can find, nothing. They're not threatened by anything. So if you're something that's never threatened, what happens when something comes in that finally is threatening? And so that was my take on it, was to how does this creature deal with their entire world falling apart? And then accidentally, I didn't realize this until I sent it to my agent, but my agent was like, do you realize you just wrote like a Hoth gentrification story? And I was like, oh, I guess I did. Like wasn't really planning on it, but it was kind of like they move in, the rent goes up, AKA you get killed. You know, it's kind of like space gentrification.
They do move in uninvited. Both of you brought up something that, and actually all of you brought up something, which is, this is a question I like asking, but it's one of those questions that even though I hear the answers to it a lot, I'm always interested to hear from new people about it, and it never really gets old for me, which is kind of gets at the core of why we are able to have done now 2 of these from a certain point of view anthologies, which is, what do you think it is about Star Wars specifically that makes people so interested in the most minute characters? The people who have like half a second of screen time, the people who literally are running down a hallway carrying an ice cream maker, the, you know, creatures who like fly by screen once and we know them more by sound than we even do by sight. Like, what is it about Star Wars that lends itself to that in a way that not everything does? Go for it, Delilah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So on Instagram, I've been following Phil Sostak and Jake Lunt Davies and a couple of the other kind of creature creators and the people that work on these characters. And they show you that, you know, I guess you watch a big party scene in Star Wars. And if you're just a casual observer, which none of us are, you think like, oh, they just, you know, put a paper plate on that dude's head and sent him out. And like that guy, they just found some mask, you know, in the back of Walmart and spray painted in blue and sent him out. But then you realize that every single character on screen has been like through 30 different designs. It's been workshopped, it's been storyboarded. They built the maquette. Someone was like hired to only do that puppet. And it might've been on screen for 0.4 seconds or not at all. Like there's so much attention to detail and love and caring where they're drawing on all of these different, like Star Wars draws on its own self now, where they harken back to older characters, like that little dude on The Mandalorian last week that harkened back to that other little dude in Force Awakens, that they put so much care in it that it makes you care. So I think a lot of it has to do with how much work goes into that background, and none of it's random.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And to a point, Michael, I think you made earlier, it's just like we have this big galaxy, and the big thing we know about it is there's a galactic civil war, or there's the Clone Wars, or there's a lot of fighting and these big sweeping themes and things. But it's also like the slice of life, like the galaxy is so much more than that. Like, what is this bartender on Lothal doing? And what it like just those slice of life stories, and kind of it just enriches the galaxy. And I know for me, I love to dig into that because I want to see the whole picture. I want to learn more about the sommelier who Derlopitis, who goes around and sells alcohol and knows all about it. Like, and that's a thing that's in Star Wars, and there's a whole short story about her. And I love just sinking my teeth into that stuff because it just makes this world building, this galaxy, that much more real. And yeah, so I can never resist. Like I am the person same. Like I will look up every little fact, everything I can about everyone on screen, because like I just want to know it all.
I agree. I think it's like the richness of the world that really lends itself, that like captures the imagination. I think since the story first, you know, appeared, that like it's very fantastic, but at the same time deeply relatable because it's got so much heart. And the heart of it is, I think, what really, like, you know, you're faced against impossible odds, you're fighting against an unbeatable enemy, you're, you know, you're no one until you are someone. And it's these huge overarching themes that I think speaks to our nature as people, as storytellers, as wanting to feel like a part of like just that evocative nature of like a galaxy far, far away. And yet it is here. It can be anywhere. It could be, you know, from the mundane to the fantastic, and just every little detail becomes so much fun. Like the ice cream maker was just something a fan noticed until it became such a huge thing. And, you know, there is a story behind it, and, you know, very crucial detail for Data for the Rebellion, and that kind of like energy and excitement, where I think it's part of being like in the Star Wars community too, where you're just not one person screaming about this thing that you love, but you're with like thousands and thousands of other people who are screaming about it. And, you know, it's that like synergy of ideas where one idea feeds into another idea, and you create something new and beautiful, and you're excited about, like, there's so many places where the universe touches in other places. Like, you know, we have this anthology, which it's so interesting seeing this be like influenced by like because it is 40 years after the movie came out, and you see the touches of you know, The Force Awakens and the new trilogy, and the canon that has been written since then, and there's so many new creators playing in the sandbox, and everyone's like, you know, feeding off that energy. And it's just, I think to me, it's always, it comes back to like hope and that heart of like, you know, you watch what is that moment when you're watching a Star Wars movie that you're just like, oh, like this is it, that I'm here.
Yeah, that's a pretty pretty good way to put it. It really, it never ceases to amaze. And you're right, Delilah, like the level of detail that you see behind the scenes, as far as like the thought that has gone into the kinds of things that like never even ever made it to the screen. Like the you know, for the 20 creatures or the 20 background characters you saw, there probably were 50 that were made that all got that same level of detail and care and thought. And then only 20 of them made the cut because, you know, only X could fit into a frame, or, you know, the scene for this thing could only be so long. That, yeah, it is pretty amazing at the richness of it. I want to actually kind of dovetail into something that Mark mentioned earlier, where Mark, you mentioned like going back to watch Empire again, and revisit a film that, that we know very well. I want to know if anyone, in kind of doing your research for your character, for the scene, rewatching Empire as a whole, however many times you did anything surprise you about Empire as a movie, the Hoth scenes particularly? You can really take this anywhere you want to go with it, that you're just like, even, X number of years since you've seen it, or however many times it is, that did you find anything surprising? You're like, I can't believe I never noticed X about, about anything.
I have one.
Okay, what do you got?
And that was just that, being that I wrote a character, during the, like, I just rewatched the Battle of Hoth, like, a lot. Like, I've seen Empire, goodness knows how many times. It's my favorite Star Wars movie. But in my head, the Battle of Hoth was so long. I thought that was like a third of the movie. And then, like, when rewatching it, I was like, it's over already? Like, all the Hoth stuff's gone. Like, oh, I don't think I never really clocked it. I just thought it was like this huge, it's not.
It's really not. It is there, and the droid hits the snow, and then we've got a Wampa punching Luke, and then there are AT-ATs. Like, we are moving. You're right.
I think I had a similar thing too, where it seemed much shorter when I watched it now, or when I watched it earlier this year. But I think that actually speaks to how grand it felt as a kid, and that it did what it needed to do. Like, it felt so huge. It felt like this battle. Like, it's a kind of I remember watching it as a kid and just being like, this battle seems like something that should be the end of a movie, but it's at the beginning. And I remember like how exciting that made me feel, like, just in terms of like storytelling. Like, it's such I think the pacing and the structure of Empire Strikes Back as a whole is incredibly fascinating. And when I watched it, because before I did just the Wampa scene, I just watched the whole thing, just to get myself in the mindset. I think from a structure point of view, Empire Strikes Back is the most fascinating of the Star Wars movies. The fact that you have this battle that would be climactic in another movie is in the beginning, and then it just spins off into this whole other direction. So that I'd say the same as Amy. I definitely thought it was longer, and I didn't realize how quickly you move on to other things.
For like, from a certain point of view's like perspective, it kind of made me realize, like, when we see the Battle of Hoth, we focus on, Han, Luke, and Leia, and then all these faceless people in snowsuits. And that doesn't really mean much to you until you have to identify those people in snowsuits and make sure that that's not the same guy as before, and he says that line, and like that, it gave me a much larger appreciation for all these individuals and all of the extras who played these characters that now we get to give full fleshed out lives to.
I think I hadn't thought about this, but I think Amy and Mario, both of you mentioning how short Hoth is, one of the things I was going to bring up is that kind of a little bit different than the previous, from a certain point of view, is there are many stories in this anthology which cover a really wide swath of time in the film, and particularly the Hoth stories. Delilah, your story, and Michael, your story are a little bit the exception, where both of you are more or less covering like a single scene, a scene and a half-ish. But everyone else's stories basically cover the entirety of Hoth, the entirety of the first, third of the film. It's not really the first third, but structurally we think of it as the first third. And so what I was interested to ask about, and I have to admit this is a little bit of an indulgent question because it created this really ridiculous challenge for us when we went to say, okay, so what order do we put these stories in? Because Mark's story should come early in the book because the Wampa appears early, but then Mark's story goes all the way through the end of Hoth. So do we put it after Hoth or before Hoth? And it actually was something that came up for a lot of them. So I'm interested to hear from everyone about how you approached the scope of your story, and how, in terms of not just its like length and word count, but its length and how much of the movie you felt you needed to encompass in order to drive the story of your individual character. Because there's a unique challenge to this book that we didn't really have the last time. And it was a fun challenge to figure out after the like 17 different permutations we went through. But I'm curious to hear about it.
So I never even told you this, Tom. There's a draft you never saw where I only covered the Wampa's journey from when it attacked Luke. So there was like 3 weeks because that story is weeks and weeks and weeks long now. And so I started from the attack to the end of the Hoth scenes. And the problem with it was that the emotional element of the Wampa wasn't hitting. And so I realized I needed to like the start. I mean, it's many of us who write fiction, we just start at the wrong place. And with this, I was like, no. We need to see the Wampa lose their home and get set on this journey for them, so that they have a very strong motivation, because it's different when you just tell the reader, oh, this thing happened, it's sad. I was like, no, let's pull those heartstrings. You're gonna feel real bad for this Wampa for the rest of your life. So I had to back it up. And I remember even writing it, I was like, is this cover too much time? Because I feel like everyone is gonna cover their one little scene, but I was like, I don't know. So I turned it in finally, and that never really came up as an issue of like the scope of time. So I was just like, okay, it's good. But I admit that I struggled with that. So there was a draft where it was much shorter. It only covered like maybe 2 or 3 days.
Interesting. I'm not sure what I would have said if I had seen that draft. I'm not sure if I would have told you to make it longer. Interesting. Yeah. Did anyone else, like, so I mentioned for like CB or Amy or Emily, did any, like, was using all of Hoth because your character didn't have enough screen time? I mean, obviously, like CB, your character, we literally never see him again. So he only has like 5 seconds of screen time. Was it about just the scope of the story, or was it just, actually Hoth, as Amy had noted, like Hoth is really a short amount of time that almost telling any story about any of the characters there, you're going to have to tell the complete tale?
I think for me, like Mark said, it was about that emotional journey. So I thought about, like, when writing Chase's story, I was like, okay, I could start literally like from the moment we see him in the corridor. But then I really wanted to go back to like, okay, who is Chase? And we start with him getting rejected for sentry duty. So it goes all the way back, even like through little flashbacks of like, developing Echo Base and how he failed at that. And like just his whole, like, structurally, I didn't, I lingered in some places and then skipped over some places, but I wanted to have like moments where you could establish that sense of time, because to me, it felt like, when you're thinking about like, okay, you're here, you're biding your time, you're on the space, and then as soon as, they're attacked, everything happens all at once. And so that's like a huge turning point in the story. And so I wanted to kind of uncover like, day-to-day life, mundanes and flirting, like there's betting pools, and and then all of a sudden there's these dangerous things happening that like, Chase didn't know, like it's the first time he's ever seen like an AT-AT, and like just like seeing like the war brought to like his doorstep, and like how is he going to react in that moment. And so deciding where to start and where to end was like, it felt very organic developing that, but it all tied back to like his emotional journey. And I'm really curious about like everyone's story, and also like you as an editor, if we can ask you questions.
Like, go for it. Sure.
Yeah, about how like, stories that took place like at the same time or kind of overlapped, like what were the thought process behind ordering all of these stories?
Well, the thought process at first is like, all right, it's gonna be super strict. So the order in which like these things happen. So like, the wonderful Kirsten White did a story about the probe droid, and a probe droid, someone who's watching the probe. So it made perfect sense. Okay, that story's got to be first. And then Tom Engelberger, writes a story about the Wills, and there's the fun aspect of the Wills writing the Star Wars crawl. And that was the last story in the first anthology. So we were like, okay, that's going to be the last story. So we had story number 1, we had story number 40, and that was about it. Everything else was like, I don't know. But really what it came down to is for stories like Delilah's and stories like Michael's, actually, they were wonderful anchors, because no matter what order we put the stories in, I could say, okay, well, no matter what order we have or whatever stories we're seeing, then we're going to put Michael's right here, which is a very specific moment during the battle scene. So no matter where you are, you're now going to be anchored to be like, nope, I'm still on Hoth. Great, this is where I am. I'm during the actual battle. And so for Delilah's, using your story, Delilah, it was, all right, we're specifically anchored in the moment that Han goes out to get Luke. The decision's been made, see you, and off he goes. And so then what we did with the other stories, like, CB, yours and Amy's and Emily's, which all just, really cover, a very specific amount of time, was to sort of order them in a way that felt right to what you know about this character from the film. So obviously, Emily's story starts, and we see Torrent Farr before we see, Chase Wilshire. And because of the setup of Emily's first scene, it made the most sense of like, okay, is the most important thing in this particular story that first scene and the setup for the character, or is it just the standby ion control line, which is later? And it just made sense from reading that story over and over that the arc of that character is set during that first scene. And so that's why her story gets put before your story, which your story involves, the box, the guy with the box. So it has to go kind of after that. And then we just sort of layered them in that way. So when stories overlap, we just figured out like what to us is the most either important or critical bit. And then where does that go from here? And then actually nicely, even as stories overlap later, a few of them fell into place where like, well, that story has to take place after that story, and that story has to take place before that story. And then it became kind of like a weird Sudoku thing, like one of those like mind puzzles where you're like, all right, Amy's story has to go after these three, but before these two. And the person in the red house, likes potato chips, those like weird math problems you used to get in school. So that's actually how that all came together. It was ridiculous. But I think it works. But yeah, I hope that was a satisfying question. It definitely got a little squirrely there for a while, because basically every week for about a month, the team would come together and be like, okay, what if the stories were all ordered like this, and look at a list of 40. And then the next week we'd be like, all right, 1 through 5 looks good, but what if we did this? And what if we did this? And then suddenly we were, all out of sorts. But it was fun. It just meant that I had Empire Strikes Back on a loop, like in the corner of my living room, like just for weeks on end, just looping and looping and looping, as if I thought that was going to help. It didn't really, but it's good background. I want to give you guys a chance. I want to give everyone a chance to share, and you can do your own story. You could do someone else's story in the anthology that you've had to read. A dealer's choice. What is your favorite moment? Big, small, Easter egg, cool reference, big moment, character beat, line of dialogue, anything. Favorite moment in either your story or someone else's story in the anthology. Don't worry about the fact that, don't worry too much about spoiler. If you want to be a little bit vague because you don't want to spoil something super intense, that's fine. But I'm interested to hear what's your favorite moments in this anthology?
Well, I'll tell you. So, Tom, I don't know if you know, Mike Chen and I are really good friends. And I remember when he got invited to pitch, and he's very, very excited. And he shared with me his idea. And I was like, texting him, I was like, yeah, man, cool. And in my head, I'm like, there's no way you get to do that. And then he did it and he nailed it. And I read it and I was like, oh, I'm so glad you did this, but also so mad. And it's so good. So if everyone's like, Mike Chen's story, I don't want to say anything. It's a Palpatine story. It's brilliant. It's so great. He just does not miss an absolute word, an absolute beat, nothing. It is a fantastic story that if you're somehow watching, I'm so jealous.
Yeah, and Mike will actually be part of the event that we're doing tomorrow night, that if you're watching this event, you are invited to. So Mike will be part of the event tomorrow. So we will be talking a little bit more about his story, which, by the way, Sam Witwer read the audio for, which was amazing and fantastic. So, okay, cool. I like that.
Can I piggyback off that?
Of course you can.
Okay, so when I first started writing Star Wars, I was very fortunate to have several friends who also wrote Star Wars. But as we all know, there is paperwork to be signed that says that you won't talk to anybody about this at all. So I was in this world of like, oh, I have all these questions. I don't know who to ask. I don't want to make anybody mad. So every now and then on Twitter, I'll be like, hey, if you ever get invited to write Star Wars secretly, like I'll be your Star Wars auntie. You can come talk to me. I'll tell you that everything is normal. Like it's perfectly legal. Nobody will kill either of us. And so like I had a couple of days where I'd get these little, Delilah, have you heard about maybe a thing? Like where people who had just gotten invited to write Star Wars for the first time were like feeling me out through Twitter DMs. And I was like, oh baby, did you get it? And it was the funnest part, was seeing these people that I've talked to about this, like this is their life dream. And then they finally got their stories, and like getting to talk to them about it was like, I'm like, it makes me very emotional. It's such a big deal to so many of us. So like, I love that. I love when people get that email that they get to do this. And it's just like, it's the best feeling. So I love that. Oh, makeup.
Yeah.
I have to do this. Oh wait, sorry. Go ahead, Abby.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Okay, I have to do this. Hi, CB. Before the pandemic, CB was one of the last human beings I saw because we happened to be at AWP before the entire country shut down. We're having lunch, and we were both like, "What are you doing? What are you working at?" And we both, just like you were talking about, Delilah, we both did the like, "Yeah, I got a thing. It's a project. I can't talk about it, whatever." And we were both kind of like looked at each other like, "Well, you just got the thing, and it just happened. Is it a thing you're not supposed to talk about that you signed a thing?" Like we both like talked to each other, and then we were like, I was like, "Is it Star Wars?" Like, so we got to have that moment in person. It was
you were the Spider-Man meme in person.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
It was so good. It was so wild.
Incredible. It was wild.
And I also put that together, like, because we have the same agent, so we got this. Our agent sent us the email together, and we both like in that email thread, and then also in text, we're just like,
yeah. So I was real excited about yours, CB, especially hearing what you had wanted to do. And then Tom, I'm so glad you pointed this out too. I can't spoil it, but the end of Hank's Green story has very weird implications after you've read the Wampa one. It's so, and that's the thing. I don't know, Hank, we didn't plan this out, but something happens, and now there's, I can't say anything else. It's a very, very interesting thing that happened.
That was well set up. That was well set up.
Yeah, it was beautifully set up that way.
Yeah, piggybacking off that, like, I think it's not any one thing in these stories. It's the intertextuality between all of them. It's like the fact that there are multiple betting pools. There's a betting pool in the Rogue Squadron. There's also the Command Center betting pool. It's the fact that several people, I think you said there are 7 references to the Rebellions Are Built on Hope line. Like everybody did that independently. Nobody emailed each other and said, "Hey, we gotta make a thread through the whole thing about how rebellions are built on hope." It's just that we're all such nerds and we all know how Star Wars functions, and that expresses itself in us telling Star Wars stories that all work together without even having to talk to each other about it.
The Star Wars hive mind works in strange ways. Everyone comes up with similar jokes or similar references or stuff like that. And it's a fun thing to see, to get like, "Hey, did you just get a story draft that also has like a Rebellions Are Built on Hope thing? And are they dunking on Han Solo?" Yeah. Like this one too. And it's great to see. Amy, you were gonna mention something a minute ago, right?
Yeah, mine is not original. Mike, Chen and I had the same agent, so we went through a lot of the same things, Michael, and I had the same reaction where he's like, "This is my idea," and I'm like, "It's a great idea, like good luck with that." And it's so great. But that's my favorite part of all of this is the day that we got to announce that we were part of from a certain point of view, and everybody was on Twitter, and this was their first Star Wars, or maybe it's not even their first one, but it's just the excitement that people get to be or have when they get to like play in this universe. Like it's just joyful, and boy, do we need joyful moments like all the time, as many as possible. So that day was just like, it was just the most fun to watch everybody like squee in text on Twitter, and like everybody like chiming in, other authors, among us, like replying to each other and cheering each other on. Like it's just, Star Wars is pretty cool, guys.
Star Wars is
So good.
Yeah.
I love how like Tom, you mentioned like the weird and like all the elements of like just the creatures, and like I think one of my favorite stories is Tracy Dion's Virgins, which like when you think about it, I was like, how are you going to tell a perspective from the cave? But she does it, it's so good, it's so incredible, and it packs such a punch. And I don't want to spoil anything, but it's, oh gosh, it's just like as a writer, and like just like I'm just like nerding out about how masterful that is too.
It's funny that you mentioned that one, because Sibby, that story was much like yours in terms of like the original pitch, which was, yours is like, "Here's just the gift of the box boy," and we're like, "Yes, do that." And Tracy was just like, "Well, I'm going to do a story from the point of view of the cave." And I'm like, "Cave? I'm taking it. I don't know how, but yes, like we need that now. Why aren't we reading that right now?" And Tracy is such an amazing storyteller. Like, I can't imagine how a story like that would work, but that's fine because Tracy is a superstar, and Tracy, who's also going to be joining us tomorrow. So thank you for helping to set up tomorrow's event even more, which is really great. So we'll be able to talk to her a bit more about exactly how did you make a story from the point of view of a cave, which is great. One of my, I have, favorites from so many different stories. One of my favorite things, CB, from your story is when we are first introduced to Jordan, the perfect, romantic foil for Chase. And he's just like described as he's hanging out in the base on Hoth. Everyone else is freezing to death. He's not wearing a coat. He's just like throwing bales of hay. It's just the way that he is described. It is just the absolute, it's so over the top and ridiculous, but in exactly the way you need it to be in that moment. Is you need it to be that way because Chase is, not able to control himself in front of the show. And so you need that sort of.
Did CB write a Star Wars himbo? Is that what I'm hearing?
He's just, he gets warm from doing all the exercise and from feeding the tauntauns and stuff.
He didn't,
come on.
He didn't evacuate because he was trying to protect his tauntaun. He was hanging out with her.
He cares. He cared a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Jordan, like writing Jordan, he's got very swoopy hair and he's always just like, super emotionally there and like encouraging, and oh my god, he is a himbo. I wanted to have like this just like really fun, ridiculous like rom-com moment, and it makes sense for Chase. It made sense for the story, and I don't know, it brought me a lot of joy to bring that.
It was what that story needed at the exact moment, and it speaks to like, it's also still Star Wars. It still feels so Star Wars in that moment because Star Wars is that malleable. It felt right in line with any of the ridiculous stuff that you see Han and Leia doing throughout this entire film. It's just really, really good. We have a question, or I had a question, I lost it. So we have a question. I'm actually going to put these two questions together. They kind of work together. So one is from anonymous attendee. So anonymous attendee, thank you for submitting a question. The other is from Bill. So Bill's question is, what sort of guidance or what's the trick to maybe coming up with a good Star Wars name? And a lot of you have had to come up with Star Wars names for this story. And I want to pair that with the question from anonymous attendee, which is like, who or what is your all-time favorite Star Wars character? And the reason I'm pairing those together is like, you might have a favorite Star Wars character, but then when you're faced with having to name your own character, what sort of goes into figuring out like, how do I make this a Star Wars name? I will tell you, at least while everyone thinks, we'll give everyone a moment to think. While everyone thinks, I will tell you that the trick that I use when I get asked from an author or someone to help them with a Star Wars name is just start saying words out loud that sound like Star Wars, and remove a vowel where there should be a vowel, or add an apostrophe. Adding apostrophe turns everything into Star Wars. Perfect. Take my name, put an apostrophe after the T and before the OM, and there you go. T-om. That's a Star Wars name. Easy. So that's where I always tell people to start if they were using a real name. But you just sort of like mouth it out.
I got lucky because I didn't have to, but I was definitely concerned. Like I was like,
you don't have dialogue, you don't have
Hood,
names, you don't have anything.
I don't have no dialogue, anything. But I was like, because my first idea was for Winrow Hood, and I was nervous because you want to have a name that fits. So I didn't have to. So I feel lucky in that regard. But I will say that my favorite, bar none, for years, Wicket. The end. I love Wicket. I'll die for Wicket. I don't care. Like, I will risk it all for Wicket. That sounds weirdly sexual. That's not what I meant, but like, I will risk it all for Wicket. I just feel like all of the Ewoks are massively underrated in Star Wars fandom, and I'm here for them. I'm here for them, Delilah. I see them. They're I just was so attached to them as kids, and I just love them, and I wanted to hang out with them all the time. And I think they're actually very fascinating once you get into their like culture. And there's anyway, I could talk about Ewoks for forever.
Let's see. Oh, go ahead, Delilah.
You go ahead.
Oh, I say my favorite character is Ahsoka, and luckily I'm better at, I think, naming characters when I write fiction, because in my Star Wars RPG, my character's name is Akosha. Just Ahsoka straight up spelled backwards. Because I had an off day when I created that name. But when I did for my story, like I like to take names I know from friends or relatives, and like Star Wars eyes them as best I can, like with apostrophes or adding extra consonants, and it's kind of just a really fun like puzzle almost. I love it.
So I feel like Star Wars has its own internal unspoken naming conventions where names just do or don't sound Star Warsy. And that once, if you like, for me, if you're going to write Star Wars, you know, it's not something where you can just like be like, oh, I've never been into it, but I'll just watch all the movies next week and write it. Like most of us have been living in this since we were born and have internalized it, and we know all of the names, and it's like you can just tell right off the bat, almost like if you said a name to me right now, I could tell you if it was probably German or probably French. Star Wars is like that. They just have a feeling to them. But I remember the first time when I was writing The Perfect Weapon, when we realized that we had thrown out all the rule books, and I was like going through my old RPG books, and like, well, what planet should this take place on? And you guys were like, oh, just make up a planet. And I was like, make up a whole planet? You're making me a god now. Are you sure that's what you want to do? And I just remember walking around the house for days and like, Vision, Sky, blah. It was like Gina on Brooklyn Nine-Nine trying to name moons. And it was like the most powerful, terrifying feeling. But you just start to get like a feel for it. And as soon as I said the right one, I was like, that's it, we're done. It's magic.
Well, they're all super, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Emma.
You go ahead. Okay, but I was gonna say, like Amy, I when I started pitching and started trying to figure out what my story was gonna be, I made a list of friends who I could Star Warsize and put in Star Wars, and I was trying to make up Star Wars names for their characters, and then I ended up only using one original name in my story, and it's a Tatooinean name, so it has kind of that format of like, you know, Skywalker or Darklighter, so it's Sunsbringer. Which I like because of the plural S. It's so perfectly Tatooinean.
And that's something, it sounds exactly like Star Wars. It just does. You're like, oh yeah, that's a Star Wars name. Without question. Mike, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I always feel like it's one of two things. And Emily, I've probably thought about this too much, way too much. And Emily, thank God that you brought up like where you're like knowing too much and feeling like you're leveling up as a human. So thank you for making me feel like it's okay. But I feel like it's two things. I feel it's either like something really cool, like you're like Han Solo or Luke Skywalker, or it's something like really rhythmic. You know, like Obi-Wan Kenobi has a great rhythm. Delilah, Bazine Natal has a great rhythm. Like there's a cool, really cool rhythm to most of these names. You didn't name? Oh, okay. Oh man. Well, it's still.
But I did two side thread characters in that story after my husband and his best friend's RPG characters that they played for years during high school. I totally stole their names.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
See, it's all in there. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just like they have like these cool rhythm, and there's never a name I don't think that you stumble over. Like we all read like sci-fi and fantasy, and we all read the books where we're like, we get to that name, you're like, I don't know what that is, you know? Like
Ron Rodo, what's that?
Maybe some, right? But yeah, I feel like it's like they're easy, they roll off the tongue, they're rhythmic, or they just really sound like awesome people. Like there's not a nerd who's named Han Solo, you know? So like
No, he's kind of a nerd.
It's true.
He kind of is. He hides it, but he kind of is. So we're gonna in a few minutes here, we're actually gonna kind of wrap up, and I have one more question before we do. But before I get to that, I have two kind of cool things that I want to tell everyone about. And actually, one of them there is going to be a link to in the chat. First of all, obviously tomorrow and Thursday we have two more events with another group of authors. We have 7 authors tomorrow, and then 6 more on Wednesday, and we are going to have not the same conversation. We have a similar but different conversation. We're going to be talking about different stories and different characters with a whole bunch of other amazing creators like Tracy Dion, like Shannon has mentioned, John Jackson Miller, Jason Fry, and a whole host of others. It's going to be a lot of fun. But the other thing I want to tell everyone about, and all of the panelists here participated, so you will be able to listen to them a little bit more, talk about their stories starting this Thursday. We have put together in secret a limited special podcast for all of you that is essentially the author commentary to this book. And it is 15-minute episodes that re-recorded sitting down with as many of the contributors who wanted to participate. And we dive deep into every single story. So, we've had a chance for everyone to talk about their character and their story a little bit today. But, if you want to spend, 15 solid minutes diving more into what's going on with Tor and Far in Emily's story, Emily's episode gets into that. There is tons more to talk about with Chase Wilsor during C.B. Lee's story. I forced Mark Oshiro to tell a very funny story about how we should all be very careful about how we use the word mount in our narratives, and how the word mount found its way into the Wampa story in a perhaps unintended way in the first draft. But the cool thing about it is all of these things are like very deep dives, behind the scenes conversations between authors and the members of the Star Wars Books team that help put these stories together. Definitely suggest you read all the stories first because they are very spoilery. We will talk about the last line of people's books. We will talk about that cool reference. But if you want a real peek behind the scenes of how this book got made and some of the conversations we all had as we were making these crazy stories together, then you should absolutely check that out. And I just realized that I sent the link to like one person. So it's right there. The first 10 episodes or so are going to drop on Thursday, and we're going to do one batch of about 10 or so a week until basically the end of the month. By the end of November, they'll all be out. They're all completely free. So you should check those out. They're hilarious. They're tons of fun. So if you enjoyed this and you enjoy the rest of the stuff the rest of this week, you'll get even more from a certain point of view. I should also note those were all recorded in like September, October. So, it's a slightly different place in our minds than we are right now, but just keep that in mind as you listen. I was listening back to a few of them the other day. I was like, yeah, different headspace 60 days ago than I am today. The second thing I want to do is obviously just thank everyone who's come today, and thank everyone for participating. Thank everyone for supporting the University Bookstore. And like I said, tomorrow and Thursday, we've got more fun and games. But we're going to end this with a very important question for everyone. I think we'll start with Emily, or we'll start with Delilah, and then we'll work our way around, which is, Delilah, now you already said who it was, so you could just repeat yourself if you want. If there is a from a certain point of view for Return of the Jedi in 3 years, who would you want to write?
I mean, definitely an Ewok. Like I've requested Princess Nisa, who was my first Ewok. I'm also a big fan of Logray. I think Tebow's cool. Heck, I even have my baby Nippet, so like I'm so down with the Ewoks. I could write any Ewok.
I have a feeling that it might be like 37 Ewok stories and like one story about like whoever had to steal the Lambda shuttle. Emily, what about you?
Oh man, I mean, if I'm continuing the trend, I guess I get Mon Mothma, right?
If you certainly could. Mon Mothma certainly could a possibility for Return of the Jedi.
You might have to come back to me on this one.
Okay.
I gotta think of something weirder.
You gotta think of that's. I love to hear that. Love to hear that. Anyone else have a thought as if you could write for Return of the Jedi, who you would write? Mark.
I mean, Ewok.
Yeah.
let me do. I'll do a whole like middle grade Ewoks book from the like all of Return of the Jedi from the point of view, because I just want to write Ewoks. But however, I'm ready. I actually want to write Salacious Crumb.
Oh, okay.
That would be the weirdest. Like it would be so weird. Like what a weird character. Like a character who as a child made me viscerally uncomfortable. Like so yeah. Let me go that way.
You just do it like anyway. Just like no matter what.
Just email that to Mike tonight, please, or tomorrow.
I would want to write what Dagobah, the beings of Dagobah, felt and experienced when Yoda passes. I think that would be
that's amazing.
Weird and really sad, and because he's been there so long, and that they're all connected through the Force, and I think it would be feelings all over the place.
I think lots of feelings.
Since Dave Filoni made it canon, Captain Rex, Yeah, on Endor. We got to see that what he's doing, what he's up to these days.
That's nice. That's a good one. See, Emily, anything jump into mind?
I got two. Two. One is the stormtrooper that Han absolutely Looney Tunes by tapping him. And the other one is, I feel like the spirit of this anthology is always like the thing that you didn't expect to feel a weird amount of emotion for. And for me, that's the Rancor Keeper. That is the one.
Malakili, the Rancor Keeper. That is another good choice. That is another good, and you're correct. That is the goal of this anthology, is to make you feel things for a character. You're like, I would never feel things about the Exegorth. I would never feel things about the monster and the trash compactor. Yes, you would, and you will.
I feel like maybe someone on Endor. I'm not sure, but I also have particular feelings about how Luke got his snazzy new outfit and who designed it.
Fashion is critical. Fashion is critical. That's a really good one. I actually like that quite a bit. Who did? Yes, yes.
I don't want to fight anybody for Ewoks, so I'll lay a secondary claim to Sice Noodles, because I don't think anybody's going to fight me for Sice Noodles.
That's a good one too.
Work that.
That's a good one.
Like all the people with weird noses, basically, will be my jam.
Yeah, you gotta bring it full circle. I mean, the funny thing about Empire is the first time we thought about when we were going to do this, we were like, well, there's all those characters at the very beginning, and then there's like a bunch of characters at the end, but like half this movie, there's nobody in this movie. How are we going to do this? But then inevitably it reveals itself. I don't know. There's millions of characters to do. Return of the Jedi, I think, is a little bit more like A New Hope in that you have these bits and moments where there are so many characters on screen that there are so many stories to tell, and a lot of them are weird. So if that happens in 3 years, maybe we'll see some of these. Anyway, I think that is probably going to do it for us. We are approaching 10:30 on the East Coast. We want to thank everyone for hanging out with us tonight. I want to thank all of these authors. I want to thank University Bookshop and everyone. And a reminder, you have access for having attended this panel tonight and having bought the book. You have access to the panels tomorrow and Thursday absolutely free. So be sure to join us again tomorrow and Thursday. We'll have more authors. We'll be talking more Star Wars. Once again, I want to thank all the contributors. This book was made during a pandemic. We're all trapped in our homes. We couldn't really go anywhere. We could talk to each other about Star Wars. And I can't thank all of you enough for all the hard work you put in to make an absolutely amazing, amazing book that also supports an amazing organization in First Book in providing, literacy opportunities and literacy initiatives. So thank you all so much. And Duane, hand it back to you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all the authors who participated. It was a lot of fun to hear the talk. I'm not quite as fond of Ewoks as you. I promised not to throw rocks at me. But I loved hearing it, and I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow and Thursday, hopefully. Thanks a lot. Everyone have a good night.
Thank you.